Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rosalind Robertson, Commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. I'm delighted to welcome you to this sixth meeting of the Governor's Council on Economic Expansion. Today's meeting is being held remotely due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 allows us to hold remote meetings during the pandemic because in-person meetings or a meeting conducted under 13D is not practical or prudent because of the health pandemic or an emergency declared under Chapter 12. Welcome, everyone. We have an exciting agenda today, and at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Paul Williams.
Great. Thank you, Rosalind. Really appreciate everybody's time. Sixth meeting. Amazing. Just thank you. And every week here, obviously, we're moving at warp speed. Just really appreciate everybody's time. Interesting agenda today. I'm excited kind of both to hear from our panelists, but also to start digging into some of our work around kind of themes, priorities, and so forth. And working our way towards recommendations. My fearless co-chair, Jeff Ettinger, is actually in the midst of some long travel, so he may try and join us. He may not be able to. We'll just kind of see, but really appreciate everyone's time. So today we're going to, oh, there's Barty just saying she's got some connection problems. So welcome, Barty. We're going to hear some additional panel perspectives. Thank you to several members who suggested names for additional panelists, just to kind of continue to listen and learn and engage with different folks in our community. So we'll have a panel. Then we're going to move actually right into some mapping, and the staff, if you've been reading any of the notes, and the 1 week that I missed, I read the notes, and man, really thorough. But the staff has done some good work in just kind of mapping out, so what is it that we've been hearing, right? And what is it that you all have been saying? And so we've got kind of if you read through your materials, you'll see some insights and just capturing of some of the different topics, themes. Our hope is that kind of just reaffirms kind of the baseline of learning and information that we've taken in, and will help us to start moving towards, kind of primary themes, primary priority areas, which then will allow us to identify specific ideas. We'll be doing some consensus building, some voting actually, to kind of cluster and prioritize ideas and so forth in the coming weeks. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute, all leading towards, ideally, a handful of priority areas that actually get pretty specific. So lots to come in all of that. We'll have some small group discussion around that mapping exercise. And then we'll, again, talk about some next steps, both for additional idea generation from council members as a whole, as well as some of the specific recommendation or specific ideas that staff will also be generating for us based on what we've heard from all of you. So it's going to be a kind of a combination of the two. Want to start next, though, with our guiding principles, which we started to flush out last week. Again, this is just as we consider themes and priorities, as we consider specific ideas, what are some principles that we would use to kind of filter down and narrow in on some specific ideas? You should have that in your materials. You should have that. Yep, there we go. And again, we had some really good feedback, good discussion, I thought, last week on this. This doesn't capture everything that everybody suggested there. With the staff and the commissioners and myself and Jeff this last week, we really tried to capture that and kind of get it into a pretty compact list of six priorities. And again, these are all things that we talked about. We tried to combine or synthesize in a couple of places, but really, again, principles. One, will this recommendation use one-time dollars effectively? Will this idea drive equitable outcomes for those who face systemic barriers? Will this idea amplify and scale programs that are successful? In particular, those programs that are community-based, community-developed. Will this idea invest in innovation that enhances impact? I think this is a bit of the language that we had around building on kind of what's out there, but also looking for innovation and new ideas. Not everything has to be new. Sometimes, in fact, we know what works, and some of this is about maybe not reinventing the wheel, but again, looking for innovation, particularly innovation tied to impact. Will this idea accelerate systemic long-term changes? Will this idea perhaps address multiple needs? Sometimes we've got specific ideas that are specific to an area that just flat out make a lot of sense. Sometimes there are some crossover. Not everything needs to cross over multiple kind of issue areas or priority areas. So again, this isn't by any means, kind of the gospel, but we want to use it as just kind of a set of parameters to outline our thinking, and we'll have a lot more discussion and dialogue about this, obviously, as we get into interpreting them in the process going forward. But any reactions, comments on that set of principles, guiding principles at this point in the discussion? You can take the slide down, then I can actually see people. Go ahead and speak up. Anybody?
Paul, it's Neil. Sorry, I joined a couple minutes late. I appreciate your explanation on addressing multiple needs. That was the one that just gives me a little bit of caution, which is, if we're not intentional about it, it can lead to peanut butter, in which case we will not have moved the needle on anything. But I appreciate your explanation.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a both and. I mean, and that's kind of the search for the silver bullet, isn't it? Right, where we find something that, boy, it really just cuts across. And there might be some of those ideas out there. It's not specifically that or nothing. I really do think there are some specific ideas that maybe are targeted in one area, that have deep impact, that are systemic in nature, that make a lot of sense. And so again, it's kind of a both and. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to add that I'm the one that brought up the innovation piece last time, and it's really around the fact that acknowledging that the system is broken and isn't necessarily already, have initiatives that are fit to address the disparities and inequities, and so innovation to allow for thinking outside of the box.
Okay.
This is Melanie Benjamin, Chief Executive of Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and sitting back thinking about some of the huge obstacles that Indian country faces in terms when we think about economic development. And one of these core issues is adequate housing. And I think if we even look in the state of Minnesota, what we're experiencing with homelessness, all the camps that you have down in the Twin Cities area, the same thing is occurring on many of the reservations as well, where there is many households living under one roof. And when I think about that, and I know we're constantly looking at ways to build new housing and providing some quick solutions for folks. And when you think about this, if you don't have the adequate housing, your safety place, it impacts a lot of in terms of education. How do you get yourself healthy? If you're not healthy, you need a stable home, and also giving you the opportunity to have a place to actually go to work, to get some education, to be able to provide for your family. Which in turns, when you have a lot of that, that has such a positive impact on the community as a whole.
Well, I'm going to give you the chance to expound on those thoughts during the panel. So we'll come back to you on that, Melanie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other.
Squads don't fail.
Paul, I'm thinking about this, and that last point that just says addressing multiple needs. And I'm thinking about it in a way that it thinks about the spectrum of where we need to invest in. Many of the things that we've heard is around addressing like immediate need, people that are living below the baseline or, quality of life standard to get them kind of to the point around housing and things like that we've heard, right? And then I also think about how do we move people up the spectrum of quality of life, whether that's more, supporting businesses so that they can innovate and grow and create more opportunities. So there's a spectrum of need or opportunity. So it's something that doesn't necessarily address many needs, but addresses, multiple parts of the spectrum, or, segmenting the difference of impact we want to make.
Yeah. Great point. Other thoughts?
Just one thought. I love what Marcus just touched on, as well as Max. But I think longer term, got to figure out this educational, the front end of the educational platform, so that this is a sustainable model. And I know it may be a bigger reach, but I just think that there's a real gap there in terms of where folks are actually entering the workplace and where their educational basis needs to really be shored up. I reflect on an organization called READ, READ in Charlotte, and it just ensured that that the inner city communities kids had a reading level that was sustainable. That was the biggest gap that we saw. And so, the corporations put, literally tens of millions of dollars behind there, and hired an executive director to lead that effort. And the real impetus was to start building the pipeline now for the future. I think we can fix some things today, but again, sometimes I feel like that's not really teaching. I think that's just feeding. And so we've got to figure out how to teach so that it's a much more sustainable effort. And we all know how the taxes determine the capabilities and the competencies that are in the school system. So somehow we've got to think past the jobs of today. I mean, we're thinking about those jobs today, but man, what a beautiful thing it would be if we were ensuring that the future was being shored up with an equivalency of education and knowledge within that base of I'll just call them clients even.
Yeah. No, it's a powerful example. And one thing I pull from that is what piece of that might we think about in terms of the immediate short-term investments and ideas. And I like your use of the word sustainability, which actually is an important principle. Are we building things that contribute to sustainability? But Brett, the other piece of what you're saying also really points to a much longer term strategy, right? And again, that might feed nicely into the second half of our charge, to be quite honest, after this first 8 weeks where we're both looking at short-term investments and recommendations, and the governor has asked us to look at longer-term sustainable shifts, right, that need to happen. So a bunch of different pieces there. Thank you for really good thinking on that. Other thoughts? Okay, again, living document here. We'll just kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Barty. Sorry, I have my hand raised, and I'm not quite sure how I did that on my phone, so I'm just sorry. But I guess I would also just maybe along those lines, one thing I guess I just want to be really cognizant of is I know we're thinking about these principles, particularly vis-a-vis the ARPA recommendations, But it is really important for us to also hold that, like, some of the ARPA funds can't be used with certain populations, right? So I'm just really holding the immigrant population right now and really thinking about, like, these set of recommendations around ARPA are not out of context with the state budget. And so I also think that, like, as we think about these recommendations, we should also be thinking a little bit about, like, where the state itself could be making investments. And I that's just one piece that I don't want to make things too complicated, but I also think that, like, that context is really important. That these ARPA funds are awesome and they aren't the be all end all, and that we have to be thinking about these things as a whole. And that, you know, even as we are making recommendations about parts, that we are thinking about the whole in that context. And that might get to some of the pieces around the further sustainability, or I like the way Marcus framed around, like, where is the immediate need and where is the long-term vision that we hope to hold and then work towards, right, and invest to. So I just wanted to make sure that we were thinking about that.
Yep. Again, fair point, and I think also both something to think about right away, but also something that we need to think about again for the second portion of our process as longer term sustainable changes. Any other final thoughts, questions? Fabulous. Again, living document, just something to kind of keep to the side as we're moving through this process. Good work to the staff, and thanks for everybody's input on this. I see Jeff there has joined us. Welcome. We just finished the discussion on guiding principles. So we're going to dive now into into our panel. So you've got, I think, bio information on all three of our panelists. Thank you again for folks for chiming in. We had a number of folks who talked about, like, we want to hear more about kind of on the ground workers. And so Brenda, one of our council members, actually is going to share her perspective on some of that. We wanted to hear more about youth employment, but also kind of a bit about kind of youth voice. And we've got Marcus Pope here with us, who's with Youth Prize and has been in kind of the thick of both the youth voice work, but also youth employment on a variety of levels. And then Melanie Benjamin, who we heard from just a few minutes ago, Chief Executive of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. And again, we wanted to continue to kind of keep the experience of our Native communities kind of front and center. And so to all three of you, I'll ask you just to share a few words about yourself, about your work, and maybe an opening question for each of you, just in terms of, you know, the last 18 months, right, and the multiple waves of pandemic that our communities have seen. What is, you know, kind of, where do you see that set of challenges in terms of the constituencies that you're working with? And Marcus, maybe I'll have you go first. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks. Good to see you virtually, and thanks for the invitation to join you today. My name is Marcus Pope. I'm the incoming president at Youth Prize. Youth Prize is an intermediary founded by the McKnight Foundation in 2010. Our mission is to increase equity with and for Minnesota's indigenous, low-income, and racially diverse youth. We take the with and for very seriously. Half of our board is comprised of young people between the ages of 16 and 25, and we seek to authentically engage young people in everything that we do. When I think about the last 18 months in the pandemic, it's been a challenge, but I don't want to lose sight of the opportunities that it's created and some of the things that we have learned and ways that we've pivoted and adapted to see some positives in our community. So it's not all negative. I'd like to just say that, but I will focus on some of the challenges that we've seen as it relates to young people. So clearly you have COVID that hit. I don't think you can separate the health pandemic from what we've experienced here with George Floyd and how that impacted young people. I think you also see rising gun violence in our community, which is so tragic. I was at the memorial service for the 27-year-old in St. Paul who was murdered, and the faith leader who delivered the eulogy was also traveling to Minneapolis later that afternoon to do the funeral, the service of an 18-year-old. And the 27-year-old who was murdered happened to be my little cousin's girlfriend, and he watched her die. He carried her, out of the club and watched her die. And so with all that we're experiencing in terms of school closures, in terms of distance learning, in terms of the pandemic, there's severe mental health and social emotional development and challenges that I think we need to think about. I think as you think about the economy, as you should, which is really important, our human resources in terms of the people and what they're experiencing, and how do we have people who are whole and able to fully participate in life is really critical if we're going to have a strong workforce. So I would hope that in this discussion, we can think holistically about what do people need during this time to maintain themselves. And as a leader, as a nonprofit leader, I'm always thinking about the staff, because if we don't have staff, how can we execute our mission? And we've invested a lot in just maintaining a healthy staff and thinking about ways to create an environment where staff can thrive and can deal with the challenges of the day, because they're numerous. So I'll just stop there and turn it to the other panelists, but happy to be a part of this conversation and to talk with you today.
Great. Welcome, Marcus. Melanie, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit about the tribe and your perspective on kind of what's sitting with you as you think about the multiple waves of pandemics.
Uju Anin Anishinaabe Duke, Mandamin Indigenous Cause, Melanie Benjamin Indigo. Good afternoon. I am Melanie Benjamin, Chief Executive for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and I have served as the tribal chairman for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe since 2000 and have been elected every 4 years since then. So it's been a huge honor for me to be chosen by the people of the Mille Lacs Band to serve them in this capacity. And a lot of times I don't know if people really understand what a role of a tribal chairman is. And we do have a government, and currently there are 11 tribal governments in the state of Minnesota. And that means we're a government. And so we determine, based on our sovereignty, how we will govern our nations. And so the Mille Lacs Band, we operate under what is called a division of powers form of government. And it kind of mirrors one of the Six Nations with the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. I'm not going to say the United States, because the United States got it from the Six Nations way back in the day and use that as their model for our government currently. And so what we do is, when we have this division of powers, we decided to divide up the powers into different aspects, and making sure that people would understand how that works. We did use that executive, legislative, and judicial. So we do have our own laws, and our reservation is our country in a sense. And sometimes I like to, when people don't really know anything about a tribe, I like to say I'm like the governor, and but not as that same capacity. Ours is based on our membership, but I am responsible for that across the board. And so when I think about the last 18 months, what a devastating impact it had on the Mille Lacs Band in terms of our economic development, because we have one big economic engine that really funds a lot of our programs. What we do with any of our businesses, the government taxes them 100%. So all the funding goes to the government, then it's divided up into the different divisions, and everyone has to present a budget. So we went to a point where we didn't have any revenue coming in, which would then, of course, impact the services, how we deliver to our membership. And scary and unbelievable that something could happen to us like that in these times. And so so we looked at different ways of how we would sustain ourselves and making sure that our members were protected and that we kept a close eye on their safety and health. So I'll stop at that point and allow others to have the table as well. Thank you. Miigwech. Great.
Thank you, Melanie. Brenda is here, council member. Thank you for taking time and with SEIU Healthcare. So Brenda.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I've seen you all before. I'm an executive vice president with SEIU Healthcare, Minnesota. As the healthcare workers that we represent are predominantly women, people of color, and immigrants. And because of this, in large part, for a long time, they were denied the right to organize, the right to have a union, and other protections afforded to other workers. As a result of this, wages and benefits have lagged other sectors, which is a key driver to the racial and gender disparities that we're looking, I think, to address in this group. I'm speaking directly about healthcare workers because that's the workforce that I work with, but the same could be said of childcare, school workers, food service, and other service workers in different industries in the economy. As I said, I've worked directly with home care or healthcare workers for about 23 years in an attempt to build power. As you hopefully all know, unions are the mechanism by which members, a lot of workers can come together and address their workplace needs and over wages, benefits, working conditions with their employers, kind of as equals. But they have to do that in a large group. They people can't do that by themselves, as we all know. Over the 23 years, there have been some real constants with healthcare workers, particularly in the service level jobs. In hospitals, long-term care, home care, and clinics, they're chronically understaffed, underprotected, underappreciated, and underpaid. I've never seen this more clearly than I have in the last 18 months. What stands out for me is how much our economy depends on workers, not only in the healthcare industry, but these other industries that we don't see that are often invisible. We see the stories of the doctors and the teachers and the nurses on the news all the time, and we should stop and we should listen, but we shouldn't forget about the folks that are holding the system up by providing the wraparound care for our families, communities, and our children. And you know, the results of us sort of ignoring this or glossing it over or not addressing the systemic disparities of these in this workforce is right now people are leaving this industry in kind of large numbers, and we're not able to sustain the systems that we need to sustain. I'm going to leave it there because I know there's other questions that are going to be asked, and want to give everybody the opportunity to get through all of those.
Well, let me actually have a follow-up with you, and I'll come back to Melanie and Marcus with the same follow-up. So as you think about, you know, the economic recovery and economic expansion, which is kind of the charge of this group, what opportunities or strategies, again, for those frontline workers, especially in the healthcare sector, what frontline strategies or opportunities do you see out there? Maybe just one or two that you think would be particularly critical or will be particularly critical to economic recovery.
Sure. I also have a little video of some workers that actually have, I wanted to give the opportunity to workers to speak to this committee too. So maybe before I do that, could we play that video and then I can talk to you about the strategy?
The life of a healthcare worker means placing yourself in constant risk. And the thank yous that we used to get have long since become empty words before fading out entirely. Our wages remain inappropriately low. Our hours remain exhaustingly long. I've seen some of the most capable coworkers I've ever known leave my department in the last year and a half. Their caring hearts haven't reached their limits. It's enervating, dangerous, and sometimes demoralizing work that can erode the spirit of even the best of us.
Once COVID cases rose higher in our community in the fall, we were forced to move to distance learning. At that time, if I wanted a paycheck, it was mandatory that I be in the school building for all contracted hours. Teachers were able to work and Zoom from home, but paras were not. As a result of not being able to work from home, I was unable to help my children with distance learning. This took a toll on my older children's grades and on my own stress level.
Parents like me, home care workers, don't have the privilege of going back to normalcy. Caring for medically fragile people who are still very much so at risk of severe illness and death, even if they are vaccinated. We are still on the hidden front line of this pandemic.
Trabajo y nuestra esencialidad.
We assumed our role with responsibility, courage, and bravery. However, holding my role in the production line almost cost me my life. I have survived to realize that me and many others like me do not have the support that reflects our work and our essentiality.
On my way home from work, I would bring 11 lunches to neighbor kids that I knew couldn't make it to the school. I would ring their doorbell and I would dash so that we could keep our distance. Of course, the kitchens where we work were not designed for social distancing. And as hard as we tried to follow the guidelines to keep our students and our families safe, we knew that showing up for work put us at a higher risk of getting COVID. We did it anyway because we knew that our kids and our communities were counting on us.
We cleaned and protected buildings, offices, and retail stores across Minnesota during the pandemic and struggled with the constant fear of getting COVID. Our work kept others safe, but we often did not have basic protection like masks or gloves.
We have sacrificed being able to go home to our families. We have nurses that have isolated themselves from their husbands and their children because they're afraid that they will infect them. Not only have we seen death and suffering, but we have suffered ourselves, and we will continue to suffer because it's going to be a long time before we get over this experience.
So this was from the testimony given to the committee that is working through how to distribute the already allocated $250 million for sort of one-time payments. I would say that what if you watch their entire testimonies and all of that, they're very, very moving. And I don't think you can listen to them without hearing the fatigue and exhaustion in their voices. When we ask our members how they're holding up, that is the first thing they say. They're exhausted. They're just worn out. And what I would say is that the shortage in staffing right now, the crisis that we're experiencing in healthcare, in particular, is just sort of like teetering the healthcare system, and it just seems like it's very fragile and it could very easily collapse at any moment. When you look at nursing homes, we can't find enough people to care for them. Therefore, they can't accept people from hospitals and discharges. So when hospitals can't discharge, they can't accept new patients. You're seeing a lot of our members will talk about the lineup and the emergencies. All of the beds are full. I'm sure Penny, you can relate to some of that. And in terms of filling positions, we can see that in one of our hospitals that we represent, over a third of the nursing assistant positions were vacant, and another worked really hard all summer to hire 80 additional nursing assistants for vacant positions, not new ones. And the shortage and these and other positions in the industry are just creating this fatigue and desire to leave the industry. So I think one of the things that we maybe haven't talked about enough, we've talked about in our committee, attracting new people into the industry, but we haven't talked a lot about retaining the folks that are there and providing the supports that are needed for the healthcare workers that are already in the industry. A couple of our other panelists have talked about rising violence, rising mental health concerns, and that's not only our members, for example, and frontline workers are experiencing that as workers, as people come in with higher acuity of mental health issues and potential violence, but they're also experiencing a lot of mental health concerns and issues themselves as they're trying to go through this pandemic. So what I think in terms of what is a solution to that, there are a lot of different ways I think that we could approach this, but I think if we used money to sort of level up the field, We have the same positions across different sectors of healthcare, nursing homes, hospitals, clinics, and the wages vary greatly between the sectors and wages vary greatly between geography. And so like an infusion of money to increase base wages for those that are already existing healthcare workers would also take away, I think, concerns that employers might have of getting too far ahead of their competitors in terms of pay. Just sort of a broad-based set of incentives to frontline workers, both in healthcare, but also childcare, schools, food service workers, some way of incentivizing people to stay in that industry that is really, really underpaid. And a lot of that comes in the way of money, whether it's retention bonuses, again, increase in basic wages, a combination of premium pay or hourly pay for current workers. One of my favorites, investments in labor management partnerships for training and upskilling of healthcare workers and other things like that. To the degree possible, we would want to see that uniform across the state so that we reduce the churn of workers between employers and have people stay within the industry and obviously be more able to take care of their families and our communities in that way.
That's great. So I want to come back to some of that. We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure, Melanie and Marcus, that we give you a chance to kind of answer that same question. Thank you for bringing real voices to the table, by the way. That is right there. It's powerful. Melanie, in terms of that same question around, as you think about kind of economic recovery and potential economic expansion, what are one or two things that are kind of top of mind for you and your constituents as you kind of look forward that you think would be kind of catalytic or would be helpful to kind of catapulting people into that opportunity?
When I think about the relationship of American Indian tribes here in the state of Minnesota with the state governor, the state government and the federal government, that we've never had the opportunity to even knock on the door of even playing field. We are generations and generations behind across the board on every aspect of life. And that's just the relationship that has been built, and the federal policies and laws that have been passed throughout the tenure of this country that work against American Indian people. And so when I think about this relationship that we do have with the current administration, it's unbelievable of that communication and how good it is to work with our current governor and his administration, because we get regular updates and relationship building and what is out there for the opportunities for us to look through. And Governor Walz has really shared all of that with us over the years. And when we're talking about even ARPA funding, this one-time funding infusion, that's only going to probably impact the very top of what our needs are. It's at least we know that we can look at how do we strategize for the long term in terms of what we need to do in our needs. And so strategic planning, I think, is very important across the board for all to really look at how we can address some of these issues. And when you think about transportation, childcare, safety, broadband issues that are all so lacking here on the reservations, it slows everything down for us because we have to continuously look at ways to try to get to the table when there are so many of those barriers that are out there. And it's just everything across the board. It's a lack of respect from local governments about tribal governments, and a lack of knowledge and education about them, which federal Indian law is very complex. And so a lot of people don't have that expertise or want to even gain some of that. And so those are some of the issues. But I think with these strong partnerships that we do have with the state of Minnesota, and able to sit at the table and build relationships with other entities, that we're going to see some positive impacts on the reservations. And I think that's very important as well.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. Marcus, opportunities, we think about kind of the expansion and the potential recovery. What's kind of top of mind for you all?
Okay, I'll give you some very tangible specifics, and then I want to go a little bit more aspirational in terms of what we can accomplish. I think there's some clear barriers in kind of how our system works that leave young people behind. I think we need to help every young person that goes to school should have an easy pathway to getting a driver's license. That's a basic kind of thing you need in order to enter the workforce, and particularly some jobs. I think, transportation, I think there's some models. How do we integrate workforce and education? Earn and learn models that get young people work experience and exposure early is really important. We've talked a lot about systemic barriers. I think it's very clear to specifically outline those specific systemic barriers, and then make sure you're tailoring your solutions, because we talk globally about equity, we talk globally about barriers, but we're not specific about what those things are, and we're not tangible in kind of making sure we have solutions designed to address whatever specific barrier exists. I think the other thing when we talk about these ARPA funds, I think there are a lot of programs we have already that aren't working optimally. So how can you use these funds to enhance existing programs that will exist beyond the ARPA funds? And I think, so for example, a lot of talk about education. We have a education tax credit. If it was fully utilized, it would be utilized at about $275 million a year annually. Guess how much is utilized on an annual basis? About $12 to $15 million a year. So how do you, tap into these existing programs that could work more efficiently, where you could deploy more of these resources by using kind of this one-time incentive money? Now, let me go a little bit more aspirational. So I told a group of young people on our board, young people we connected with, hey, I'm talking to this governor's council about youth engagement, youth leadership, youth in the workforce. And they say, why didn't they invite you? And I'm like, I'm the leader of Youth Prize. You should invite me. They should invite me. But they're saying, you're not young. And so I think young people have some really good ideas about how to transform society, and they want to contribute. And our reluctance to tap into that desire is a missed opportunity. Young people have great ideas. They have some bad ideas. I'm not going to come and tell you that everything a young person says is the right idea. That's not true. But they do have some great ideas, and I see you, Paul, and they can contribute to the conversation meaningfully. And we get better data and better insights by including those most proximate to the issue and most impacted by the issue. So that's my big charge, and I'm willing to help for you to hear directly from young people. I think I'm a good alternative, but you can talk directly to some young people and really get some really good insight around what the issues are and what the solutions are. And they want to be a part of the solution. They also, and this is really a charge to the business leaders on the call, because I think you are in a unique position to impact this. They also see the way the current system works, and they see it as dysfunctional. How hard it's to get something done, through our political system. I mean, we were engaging young people around COVID issues, and we were working at the legislature. Great work, great educational work. And one young person said, you know what? I'm going back to the streets and do activism. This is taking too long, and people aren't listening to us. And so I was listening to him, and I wanted to challenge him and critique him. But when you looked at the fact that in 2020, it was an election year, so because of that, nobody wanted to work with each other. People couldn't get anything done. And you had all of these different groups, pushing their own agenda. And I think, and there's nothing wrong with pushing your own agenda, but my point is that we need to find ways to address the polarization, the gridlock that exists, and some of the challenges we have with just getting basic things done for people. Because young people are watching us, and they see us in our camps, in our trenches, and they don't see it as functional. And how can we get them engaged? And this is my other aspiration. We need to find formal pathways, and you may say, what does this have to do with economic resilience or whatever? We need to find formal pathways to increase the civic engagement of young people in our communities all across the state. You know, the work I'm most proud of that we've done at Youth Prize is in Northfield. I say that it's not the most, I'm proud of a lot of things. One of the most things I'm proud of is in Northfield, we've worked with them over the last 5 years to get young people engaged on city level boards and commissions. There's over 90 young people engaged in this. They just elected their first person of color to the city council in Northfield, and that person came through that work. Why is this so important? If we want our communities to be vibrant, to be strong, we need to accelerate, particularly when you look at the growing population, you look at who's impacted by disparities. We need to accelerate young people's engagement in civic life and civic society. That will be huge for transforming our economy and our system. They need to be a part of the solution.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm of course, and folks, if you have one or two questions, please be thinking about that. We'll go here until 2:55, another 6-7 minutes. But Marcus, I'm laughing because we run 2 alternative schools, as you know, and I get beat up on that question of why aren't you talking to us, right, directly? So I very much resonate that, and an absolutely fair point. Let me ask you a question here. And it's not fair, but to spring this on you, but do you know what is the youth employment? What's the youth participation rate for employment? Do you know? And how has that trended in recent years?
So we've done some estimates, and we've tried to use our best science to try to estimate. And Commissioner Grove, you may have some insight on this as well, but we estimated between 18 and 20,000 young people are working. And that's secondary students in the state. And the other thing I want to mention is that when we talk about COVID, young people were concentrated in industries hardest hit by the shutdown. And so they were often the first laid off. And so we need to know that and what that means. When you look at any early experience is very correlated or even predictive of future experience. So we want young people who are engaged in the workforce to have really good early work experience. And so that's another thing. Invest early in employment opportunities for young people and ensure they have a high quality experience that's supported through mentorship, through all types of other types of relationships that support success. And young people haven't had the greatest success through no fault of their own, through no fault of any of our, of us. Here at the table, they haven't had early success around workforce, in part because of the pandemic. Things are opening up where people are hiring young people, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we need to make sure we're supporting our young workers. The other thing I want to mention that I forgot to mention is that one of the overlooked populations in terms of young people and young adults is young adults, 16 to 24, often overlooked. And Paul, you know this because you're working with them often through your charter schools. And we've actually, I don't know if we've released it yet, but we're working on a comprehensive plan, a new deal for opportunity youth to address the needs of young people who have dropped out. It's estimated that because of the pandemic, 1 in 4 young people will be disconnected from youth, from work and education, largely because of the pandemic. That's significant. And do you know what the cost is of a high school dropout? Someone who's not dropped out, and if you're not working, you're not in school, what are you doing? And so we need to leverage the potential of young people being connected to education and to workforce. And the education system, young people will talk to you forever about their ideas for transforming the education system. And we need to find ways to get that done, and we need our business leaders on board to make that happen.
So just seeing a couple of good activity in the chat here, talking about misperception that young people are not supporting a family with their incomes. Again, I know from our experience that is exactly kind of the opposite, but that perception is very real out there. Great comments here in the chat. Do we have a question or two from council members?
Hey, Paul, I put a question in the chat there. Marcus, you mentioned the other Marcus. Marcus talking to Marcus is great. Similar to tax
No,
credit
Marcus,
utilization.
Marcus, you're the other Marcus. No, I'm just playing. It's good to see you.
What other specific, I know you mentioned things to enhance, and this could be for, all three of our panelists. What specific policies, programs do you see in your line of work that needs that enhanced investment to be fully utilized?
Thanks, Marcus. Good to see you too. We always joke because people always get us confused. But I think we need to look at, there's some low-hanging fruit, I think, when it comes to young people that we could use ARPA dollars for. So, for example, if you think about foster youth, we probably can count, this is something we can measure. To a point earlier, somebody kind of basically said, we need to bite off what we can chew. We need to make sure we have measurable impact. But if you add up the number of young people in the foster care system who are aging out of that system, you could make a meaningful difference with some fairly modest resources to decrease homelessness. And you know what the cost of homelessness is. I know we have another panelist who's in public health, but just across the board, being homeless is a very significant, for that person. Houseless is significant, but it's also a huge cost of the negative benefits that we see in our community. But you could really have specific tailored strategies to address the finite number of young people who age out of foster care on an annual basis and decrease homelessness significantly in the state. And there's a population of young people aging out of foster care where it's almost predicted that they will become homeless after aging out. And we can address that right away. And I bet you the resources would be modest and you would make a real difference with some young people. I also think we need to think about how do we transform education, and that's a long discussion in terms of how we get that done. I know there are some folks on the call who have some really big ideas around that we need to consider, but I think we need to figure out how to navigate that piece and include young people in that process. I think everybody will agree that the motto of our education system is not with the times. And then we need to support young people in engaging in a number of pathways. Another specific policy thing we could do is really increase the age in which a young person can secure a high school diploma. I think at 22, you have to secure a GED, and you often lose all the work you did prior to that. We could increase the age in which you have young people have the jurisdiction of the K-12 or the secondary system, and we could eliminate the extent to which young adults fall through the cracks in terms of securing that important credential. We can also find ways to incentivize dual enrollment strategies and strategies where we accelerate young people engaged in the post-secondary system. The rates of success when young people get early college or high school students engaged in post-secondary across the socioeconomic spectrum is phenomenal. There is evidence that suggests that you get a young person connected to higher education early, the success rate expands tremendously. So we need to think about strategies like that as well. Did I do it for you, Marcus?
So I want to we've got a few more minutes here actually until 3. Melanie, I want to come back to you here, and just noting in the chat, Steve posted some good information here on youth unemployment rate being the lowest it's ever been, about 6.5%. More hiring of young people happening now than usual. That's good. Heading into the pandemic, I was hearing in the Itasca group that our youth employment participation was at a very low level, and that in order to fill the jobs that we had open, we desperately need to get young people back into the labor market. So it's maybe that's shifting, but anyways, that's good. And Tracy had a good point in there about the need for youth to learn how to advocate for themselves in the workplace, an important skill in the workplace. Melanie, I'm wondering, you mentioned, Marcus, I'm going to hold off here for a minute. Melanie, you mentioned earlier that relationships and some good strategic thinking and strategic planning was an important piece of looking forward. Were there any specific ideas around ARPA funds that you all were zeroing in on? And Brenda, we'll come to you for the final word here in a minute.
We're looking at we put our strategic planning in different areas. Of course, we have our elders, our culture, our housing. We're looking at long-term care. And when Brenda was talking about all those issues with the healthcare, we're experiencing that as well. We're able to retain, but we are not able to find new folks coming into the field. And when we think about the need in our elder communities, because they are getting older and they stay with us longer, that we need to have some adequate care about that. And we wanted to make sure under our ARPA planning that we really made sure that we had a good solid plan on how we were going to get this infusion into the community for housing. And education, of course, and broadband, those are the areas that we're looking at. And of course, when you think about those areas, they all branch out to huge other responsibilities as well. And also the workforce, how we get the youth involved into the workforce and making sure that they have the opportunities for education, vocation, training, or on the job, and also to look at their health well-being. Where are they at today in terms of how their self-esteem, what kind of all those negative kind of social ills that we carry along with us that prevent us from moving forward sometimes. So those are some of the areas that we decided that we were going to strategize and try to infuse some additional support for those areas.
Great, thanks, Melanie. And Brenda, how about on your end? Any final closing thoughts on kind of the expansion and specific opportunities or use of ARPA funds that you think would be priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a great panel to be on. It helps, all the jobs that youth are seeking are a lot of the jobs that we represent. They're, these service level jobs that, while we certainly have a lot of, people older than 25 in these jobs as well, I guess my point is that these are overlooked jobs, right? These are jobs that are often swept under the rug. They're underinvested in. And so investing in in this type of work, investing in healthcare, making sure that we're not only keeping, but drawing people into an industry where people are afraid to come work in because of the pandemic, because of the challenges that we face. I think, again, it's really, I think, important that we think of a way to infuse those jobs with some sort of incentive for people to stay and to come into the jobs, and to tie that to clear worker standards and clear employer standards and employment standards. I think there's lots of ways that we can think about doing that, but unless we address the fact that there are just there's historic work that is undervalued in the state, and it's undervalued because of who does the job. And in the case of healthcare, it's women, it's people of color, it's immigrants. We need to address that particular inequity to keep our system running.
Fabulous. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. This is always just a drop in the bucket compared to what we would love to really dive into. So everybody give a virtual clap. Thank you really so much. Good to see you, Marcus and Melanie. Thank you for your time, and Brenda for your perspective. And again, all of you, appreciate you grounding us in kind of real experience in the community. So thank you. Okay, we are going to shift into looking at kind of, again, an initial mapping of what have we been hearing. And I think today certainly reaffirmed a lot of things that we've been hearing, but let's keep in mind that we've got some additional perspectives from today's discussion that we want to keep aligned here. But also we've over 6 meetings, over 5 previous meetings, we've heard and learned a lot, and the staff have been listening and taking incessant notes. And so I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth and Nick actually to walk us through. You should have a themes document or a mapping document that's got green boxes and some shaded boxes that, again, just starts to capture some of what we've been hearing.
Thanks,
Nick
Paul.
and Elizabeth?
Thank you so much. Good to see you all. Elizabeth Frosch, I'm the Chief of Staff over at DEED. As Paul indicated, we're looking at I think it's called the Economic Expansion Mapping Draft. If you want to pull that up, projecting it here as well. Obviously, a number of these themes and ideas and insights have sort of resonated over and over again. And so one way that we're thinking about organizing this as we go forward, as we're trying to sort of hone in these last few meetings, is looking at the lens through sort of key themes. And so you'll see we've broken it down across a table. Again, these are ideas that were taken from previous meetings in your small groups. There's some of your priorities that came out on day one. So, you know, if you look at these, we're going to spend a little bit of time after this just breaking out into small groups again to kind of think and get a gut check from you to make sure these are, in fact, sort of the buckets of what you initially are hearing, and you know, ask the question, are there other insights or themes that are not here that you'd like to see reflected as we start to sort of evaluate and do this together? So just to kind of take through them, you'll see what's labeled here is sort of key concepts of what we've heard from folks, how that sort of, you know, crosses over in terms of what we're focusing on as a council, and then initial ideas around solutions. These are extremely early. And if you have notes or if you have ideas of things that have come up in your own head as you've been doing the work, feel free and send them to Nick and me, and we can help the team capture that and plug it in here. But some of the big ones, just to kind of cut this in broad strokes, are cultural communities, overarching concept, obviously, what's impacting various BIPOC and communities of color, indigenous populations in our state. Mental health, we heard a little bit of that today again. Housing, and I'm just going to keep scrolling on my own screen here. Youth employment engagement, we just heard Marcus address a number of those concepts. And then a big one, a lot of information coming out on workforce. So that's sort of how we're summarizing, how we're initially mapping it. Again, if you have other ideas, please send them. But I think we're going to take about 30 minutes now. Paul, I'll kick it back to you. And we are going to do another round of breakouts to kind of look at these.
Can you scroll down, because there's a third page there that has small business entrepreneurship, childcare, right?
There we go. So yep. So a number of those other themes, entrepreneurship, innovation. I know that's come up in a few different ways from our guests. Healthcare, childcare, and then this concept of sort of what's going on in greater Minnesota, rural communities as well.
Great. So again, just trying to capture, and again, a lot of information in the bullets. What did we learn? What are our areas of focus and values? Just trying to flesh out a little bit, and then what are solutions, and a lot of room to be added in terms of solutions. Again, as we continue moving forward, we're going to be drilling down on these. But when Jeff and I and the commissioners and the staff were just kind of talking about it, I mean, these were the big themes that I heard. I heard a ton of conversation about cultural communities, about building capacity in communities. Whatever it is that we're doing, we need to build capacity, muscle, legs, right? The ability to deliver this work from a cultural perspective. Heard a ton about mental health, kind of cutting across many issues. We heard that again today. Housing, right? And housing supply, and housing as a stable platform for many other issues in people's lives, in people's ability to get to other stuff in their lives. Youth employment, again, Marcus spoke to that, but we heard a lot about that in different contexts. And then I think, as Elizabeth said, workforce reskilling. I thought Brenda talked some very specifically today about some of those workforce challenges, not only valuing workers, but trying to level out the playing field. Small business and entrepreneurship, we heard about that. Ruby Lee, we heard about that from Renee Dossman at Neighborhood Development Center. Culturally specific small business entrepreneurship. Childcare, boy, childcare kept coming up time and time again as just a pivotal, like housing, one of those essential kind of core areas that everything else kind of springs off of. Healthcare, you just can't go anywhere without talking about healthcare. and then kind of some of the distinctions between greater Minnesota rural challenges. Broadband, I think, very much has come up several times in this context, and differences kind of in greater Minnesota versus the urban areas. So big buckets to be sure, and I think lots of specifics to start getting to. So Elizabeth and Nick, I think we're going to pivot now to just small groups, just to kind of talk about these themes, these buckets. Start trying to think about priorities and specific ideas, and then we'll come back and finish up with just some thinking about next steps.
Real quick before we go to small groups, there's a question on how the solutions column was formed in the document. Those are the solutions that came out of small groups and the meetings. They're solutions proposed by council members.
And to be fair, I think that set of boxes, I think, is still to be filled in quite a bit. And I mean, we haven't asked council members, hey, what are your specific ideas in the small groups yet? So there's a lot more work and a lot my large gallery view here. Looks like we are. So we weren't going to do a long report out here, but I would like to just hear kind of just any impressions, takeaways from your small group discussions. We had a fantastic conversation just about kind of a little bit about the principles, but this notion of leverage in the choices that we're making. New programming versus existing programming that is working and can be scaled up. I think we heard some comments about wanting to hear back more from commissioners on that list of ideas that were out there and what was funded, what wasn't funded. We had a great conversation about access and the need to create access, right, for disenfranchised communities, regardless of what the strategy is. Fantastic conversation about entrepreneurship and housing specifically. So I was just really pleased with kind of the ground that we covered, all gearing up towards this next phase of starting to dig in on specific ideas. So any other impressions from other conversations?
We had a great discussion in our breakout with our group. We we took into consideration the request here, but we approached this by looking at each of the themes and just sort of thumbs up or down as to whether or not the solutions lend themselves to having a meaningful impact by using one-time dollars. And I think what we discovered along the way is some of the themes would definitely we need more information to really inform a decision as to whether or not we thought it lends itself to having a meaningful impact using one-time dollars. But I thought it was a really good discussion and a good way to start to really determine where do we really focus our ongoing attention. But great discussion. One suggestion that came out of our work group was we take this chart and really spend a little more time with it offline, so that members start to think about additional solutions and what the impacts might be. Anything else from our group? Neil, Tracy, Marcus?
I think you captured it well.
I think so too.
Great. Steve, any quick thoughts?
Sure, yeah. We, Brenda, Talia, and Barty and I had a great conversation. I think one bucket that we kind of pointed out we thought maybe was missing was something on green energy or green jobs or energy more broadly. Talia brought up that rural is maybe both a bucket, but it's also kind of a lens. You could kind of incorporate rural into several of these different buckets as a kind of way of looking at the various solutions. Talked a lot about kind of where do we want Minnesota to be in 2040 and what do we do now to get us there, like starting with that broad of a scope in mind. And so some good conversations about entrepreneurship and technology. And then we talked about kind of what our theory of the case is right now. Like, is our theory that we still are in stabilization mode, and so our ideas and programs should focus on stabilizing or stemming loss or addressing sort of response to pandemic, or are we in rebuilding mode and we should be focusing on investments and growth in the future, or are we somewhere in between, and which of those takes on more weight, which I thought was a really useful discussion. And then we had a really interesting discussion just around kind of community transformation. What does it take to transform communities for the future, whether that's the culture of that community, whether it's how businesses and community, gathers together, whether it's even, the arts and culture of a town or a place, and it kind of fit in with that cultural specific solution bucket at the top. But we got pretty deeply into that discussion too. So just a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Great. Well, good work, everybody. So just to kind of close, so what's coming up? One, we want to again keep drilling down to specific ideas, and we've created a very simple form for people to pull together a specific idea and submit it. And we've got I think there's going to be the link to the form is going to be in the chat. We'll also send out a separate email. Staff, the commissioners and the staff will also be pulling together specific ideas that both are on this chart already, but also we'll go back and kind of flesh those out in each of these areas and have some things. And I think somewhat linked probably to the list of ideas and gaps and previously funded ARPA strategies. We're going to flush some of that out and have some ideas. So what we want to do is build a combination of staff-generated ideas based on our conversations, and then additional ideas that will come from council members. And we'll use that just as our first cut for starting to narrow down. The form is very simple. It talks a little bit about, asks you to just say a few words about, how does this leverage, funds? How does this, how is this a good use of one-time funds? Some of those guiding principle questions, any sense of whether there's a financial size to the idea, that kind of thing. But we just want to get a list of ideas out there for discussion. So Elizabeth or Nick, is that in the chat? I don't have my chat on, so.
Yep.
Okay.
And we'll
So you'll see the link there. Again, we'll send it out to you all, and staff will be pulling together specific ideas for you all to chew on, and we'll do some voting and some consensus building. I was just talking in the small group. I'm one of those cheesy strategic planners. I love the dot exercise, right, where you're given 3 or 4 dots, and some people go put all 4 of their dots on one idea. Some people put 1 on 4. Just a way to just start to identify kind of consensus and where the group is. Juhi's asking here, 1 idea per submission. Elizabeth is saying yes, but submit as many times as you want. So, that's coming. We want to have those ideas back to the staff by next Sunday, October 24th. We'll turn those around very quickly for the next Monday. And again, we'll review ideas and continue to work towards prioritizing beginning next week. Any questions about that, or Elizabeth or Nick, anything that you want to add to that in terms of logistics, specifics?
I don't think so. I think we'll be sure to share this out in the notes as well, so you all get another round to look at that. And then the criteria will ensure that that's linked. You might have to just cross-check that against the principles in terms of number 3 on the form if you've looked at it, but we'll make sure that's clear as well.
Okay, and then last piece is you've got this chart of kind of upcoming meetings in your materials. So again, we'll continue with this conversation, prioritizing, working with specifics begin next week. What is next week's date? Next week is the 25th, Monday the 25th. The following week, we'll continue ranking ideas and move into November 1st. I think we were having some discussion. The governor has to leave on a trade mission somewhere around the 15th. And so we were trying to aim for a November 8th meeting as some kind of presentation. Not sure what that'll look like. I'm hoping that the full council can be there with the governor and the lieutenant governor. Knowing that we've got lots of work to come. So, and again, recalling that this first phase of our work is about shorter term recommendations to the governor. Second phase of the work is about some of these bigger, longer term systemic questions. Big charge there too. So lots more to come. Rosalind, as our host, anything else to be added there? Oh, you're on mute.
I think you've covered it very well.
Great, great. All right, you get three minutes of your life back, right? Use it well. Great to see y'all. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thanks, everyone. Great meeting.
Thanks, everybody.